Sometime in the night, however, after the two men had gone, he wakened in a condition of frenzied excitement. He was still confused, made terrible grimaces, and the policeman on guard in the room had some difficulty in keeping him in bed until he could be tied there. After that an intern gave him a hypodermic of some sort, and he became quieter. Police swarmed in and out of his room all that day, Tuesday, but without result. "You can get my point of view, Miss Hall," the inspector said a day or two later. We knew by that time he was Talbot. Dean had wired for his prints the night before, and they came in that day. And we knew his history, knew he'd killed a woman, been sent to a state institution as insane, and had escaped from it years before. You can see how it looked, and I'll admit the whole thing had me fooled, or Dean did. I've often wondered since what you told Dean to put him on the right track. He didn't get that out of a microscope. It was of no use to tell Inspector that I had told Herbert nothing, because I knew nothing. And Herbert Dean today says that the police still regard his entire success in the case as due to me. Nevertheless, although they believed that they had the Crescent Place killer under guard in the hospital, the search for Lizzie Cromwell still went on. She had not visited her sister's house, and with one exception, from late Saturday afternoon when she had left the interurban car 4 miles beyond Holly Tree, she had seemingly dropped out of existence. She had walked back that 4 miles along the track, carrying her bag, for a man had seen her and so reported. He had seen her clearly in the light of another car, a tall thin woman with a valise, who had stepped aside to let the car pass. "Like one of these flashlight pictures," he said. "But I got a good view of her. She wore black clothes with some sort of a big pin at her neck, and she had a kind of old-fashioned satchel in her hand. That had been about 10 o'clock at night, and was only a mile beyond the house where the pool and the drawers from the trunk had been discovered. Where and how she had spent that interval while she presumably waited for darkness nobody knew, possibly, according to the police, resting somewhere in that darkening countryside and waiting to meet the man Daniels. "One thing was sure," said the inspector. "This Daniels was in it up to the neck. We took that darky to the hospital, and with that fake beard on Daniels, he identified him as the man who helped carry down the trunk. Only thing in our minds was whether he'd done away with this Lizzie too, as well as the Talbot woman. You've got to remember that if he was Talbot, and all of us were sure of it, he'd been crazy once, and he might be again. For Lizzie had not been located, although the general alarm sent out for her described her as meticulously as it had described Lydia Talbot. At headquarters everyone but Herbert believed that our murder mysteries were solved, and that the story was written large for everyone to read. Indeed, the commissioner himself gave a statement to the press sometime that day, much against Herbert's advice. In it he stated that the various crimes had been committed as part of a plot to secure the gold taken from the Lancaster house, and, although he rather hedged here, he intimated guilty collusion between the street cleaner, Daniels, and one Elizabeth or Lizzie Cromwell, still missing but likely to be discovered before long. The gold had not yet been located, but here too the police expected results very soon. Nevertheless, that statement of the commissioners, coupled with a further description of Lizzie, brought some result that night. Lizzie had been seen early on Sunday morning. A woman answering her description, but without a valise, had gone into a restaurant of the cheaper sort downtown and had eaten a small breakfast. For this she had rather apologetically tendered a bill of large denomination in payment, and had waited until the cashier sent out for change. She had seemed very tired, but she had been neat in dress and quiet of manner, very ladylike. And the cashier remembered a cameo brooch. From the beginning the police had believed that this valise had held the missing head, and now to the search for Lizzie was added an intensive one for the satchel. Late as it was, men were sent out again, not only to cover the check and baggage rooms of the railway stations and such express offices as they could reach, but outside the city line the county officials collected troopers and local constables to search beside all railway tracks and public roads leading into town. But as everyone who followed the case will remember, the bag was not recovered until much later. Then in dredging a new channel under one of our railroad bridges, it was brought up one day with a load of sand, with its gruesome contents still inside. I knew very little myself that day of what was going on. The Crescent had sunk into a lethargy which amounted to fatalism. Our servants were packing to leave, and Aunt Caroline was demanding over the telephone that we close the house and stay with her downtown. At noon the police had asked Margaret Lancaster to identify the man in the hospital, the prince sent by mail not having yet arrived and Mrs. Talbot having refused to leave her bed. She came over first to us, a mere shadow of herself and looking incredibly old. I remember thinking that Laura Dalton could never be jealous of her again, and as she had come without a hat, noticing with a shock that the hair I had always admired had been dyed hair, and that it was now gray at the roots. I admitted her myself, Annie being upstairs packing a trunk. "May I come in, Lou?" she said. "I have to go to the hospital, and I shall need that album I gave your mother." I don't know why Hester Talbot won't go. It's certainly her affair, not mine. If Uncle John is so changed that he could work here for months and none of us recognize him, how on earth am I to do it now? She wanted the album, she said, because there was an old photograph of John Talbot in it. She could take it with her, and it might help. Anyhow, it was all she could think of. I did not know what to do. Mother came in just then and said the album was in the old schoolroom. But of course it was not, and at the end of an hour of frantic searching Margaret went away without it. That was the first of 2 visits that afternoon for the same purpose. The second was George Talbot, in a savage humor and looking as though he had not slept for days on end. "Mother wants that album Margaret Lancaster gave your mother," he said.